Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Read Around the World with Random House Children's Books. I am Ronny Khuri, a senior editor at Booklist. My pronouns are he and him. And before we begin, I will go over some technical details. If you're in the audience, you are in listen-only mode, but we definitely welcome any questions that you may have. So on the bottom of your Zoom screen is a toolbar with a button for Q&A. If you have a question, if you need technical assistance, you can just click Q&A and type your message into the box that pops up. We at Booklist will do our best to respond to all of the tech-related questions, and we can pass along all other questions to today's panelists. I will try to fit in a question or two from the audience if we have time, but if we don't have time during the panel, they will have the chance to follow up with you directly after the webinar. Booklist offers closed captioning on all of our webinars. To enable or disable them on your screen, please look for and click the Show Captions icon on the toolbar that I mentioned before. If you choose to enable subtitles, you can adjust the size of them at any time by selecting Caption Settings. And finally, Booklist expects all participants to maintain an atmosphere of respect, of course. Anyone who violates this standard of behavior may, at the discretion of the organizers, be immediately removed. Okay, we have a great program for you today, and I will begin by introducing our panelists. And you can turn on your cameras as I introduce you. Hazar Elbayya's work is heavily influenced by her Palestinian roots. Born in Gaza, she recently was awarded a degree in graphic design from George Mason University, and My Olive Tree, which we'll be discussing today, is her debut. Meera Sriram grew up in India and moved to the US at the turn of the millennium. She is the author of several picture books, including A Garden in My Hands and A Gift for Amma, which in a starred review, School Library Journal called an excellent story for young readers to enhance their understanding of color and an aspect of traditional Indian culture. An electrical engineer in her past life, she now enjoys writing for children and advocating for early and multicultural literacy. Welcome, Meera. Seina Wedlick enjoys reading to the sound of pouring rain and considers herself an expert at pairing books with delicious snacks. We'll have to ask about that. When she's not writing or working on special projects, Seina can be found exploring or spending time on the beach with her family. She also enjoys visiting bookstores and collecting postcards. Welcome. And last but not least, we have Gracey Zhang, an award-winning illustrator, author, and animator with a BFA in illustration from the Rhode Island School of Design. She received the Ezra Jack Keats Illustrator Award for her debut picture book, Lala's Words. Gracey has also illustrated The Big Bathhouse, which received 5-starred reviews, Nigel and the Moon, a jumpstart read for the record selection, and The Upside Down Hat, which was the New York Times Best Illustrated Children's Book of 2022. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We will dive straight in, and we'll start just by going around the table to introduce the book for those who don't know about them. So, Meera, could we start with you if you don't mind? Just tell us about the Spice Box.
Sure. Thank you, Ronny, for the introduction. Thank you, Booklist and Random House, for having me here. I'm so happy to be in the midst of so much creativity and talent. Thank you. So the Spice Box is a picture book illustrated by Sandhya Prabhat. A Spice Box is something that's very iconic when you're preparing Indian food. And this is a story about a little boy, Rishi, who wants to cook for his grandmother. He wants to help his dad cook for his grandmother using the spice box. So obviously he wants to use the colorful and flavorful spices in the spice box. But holding it, he also knows that the spice box holds more than just the spices. He knows that it holds a lot of the family's history, memories, and stories. So, in a way, the journey of the spice box is a metaphor to the family's collective journey in life. And yeah, but he wants to cook. He's excited. He's too impatient. He drops the box. So all the powders spiral to the ceiling. The seeds are scattered. And the story is about how obviously he fixes it all. But at its heart, it's also about the power of family stories. It's a celebration of family history and family memories. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Seina, would you go next and tell us about the night market?
Yes, thank you, Ronnie, Booklist, and Random House for having me. I'm so excited to be here. So, the night market follows a young girl as she explores the mesmerizing wonders of a Nigerian night market. So, each stall is basically an adventure waiting to be discovered. The illustrations in this book were done by Brianna Mokodiri Uchendu, who's also Nigerian American, and they're so, so beautiful. So basically, when I wrote The Night Market, I wanted it to tug on the joys of finding treasures in unexpected places. So with each page, each reader can explore a new stall, and we follow this character as she does exactly that all night long. And she has to finish exploring the market before the sun rises. So that's The Night Market in a nutshell.
Thank you very much. Hazar, you are our debut. Would you tell us about My Olive Tree?
Thank you so much for the introduction and letting me be part of this. So, My Olive Tree is about a little girl named Salam who learns the importance of olive trees through her community. The olive tree is a symbol of resilience and strength and unity. And Salam sees firsthand how community works together, even in times of hardship. Through this story, I wanted to show how something as simple as an olive tree can connect us all together and to the land. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. And Gracey, tell us about Noodles on a Bicycle, please.
Thank you, Ronnie. So Noodles on a Bicycle is it's about the soba noodle delivery drivers of Japan. And interestingly, Japan has had food delivery available since the 1700s. It's been around since then. And with the invention of the bicycle, all of these meals that were carried stacked up by foot were carried on bicycles. And so it was not uncommon to see these delivery drivers on bicycles carrying stacks of noodles uh, all around the city. And so Noodles on a Bicycle is about a family of sisters as they follow and admire these bicycle drivers from afar. And at the end of the story, you realize their father is one of these drivers. And it's just I love Kyo's writing, and it's a very heartwarming story, like a bowl of soup, soupy noodles. So yeah, it was a pleasure to work on.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody. And just so the audience knows, I believe all four of these books are now out in the world. So congratulations to everybody. It's kind of to further the introduction. I wanted to rewind with the first question and ask each of you about your journey, your personal journey to this project. And Hazar, I'll start with you. But what I'm interested more generally in what led you to working on picture books or children's books in general, and then kind of what specifically drove you to this book, this project.
So I've been drawing ever since I was little. I was actually surrounded by artists growing up, like my uncle and all my sisters are all artists. So I always knew I was going to end up making art. So the idea of making books for kids was kind of new to me until I started doing bedtime stories with my niece and nephew, and we loved story time before bed. But I realized, sorry, we weren't, there wasn't a lot of books about us, about the struggle we are, currently going through. So I decided to create my olive tree as a symbol of hope for children that are experiencing war, and to also help parents teach children about war in a more gentle way. So that was kind of the way to go for this children's book.
Yeah, I know picture books can sometimes take many years to kind of come to production. I'm just curious when you started this book.
I started it in 2020. So, and I always thought about it, and I started working on it in 2022, where I just poured everything into this book, and I really wanted it to be the most, because it's my first book, I'm not too much into this field yet, since I studied graphic design, but it did have some elements into it. So I'm really excited how people will react to this book. It is my first, so.
Yeah, it's an amazing way to enter the profession. Gracey, let's move on to you. You've authored, you've illustrated, you've worked with Kyo before. Give us a little background on your road, just as a person in the field, and then also as this I think the second collaboration with Kyo, right? Yeah. What brought you to this project?
Uh, yeah, so I studied illustration in school, in an art school, and so like children's book illustration has always been like one of the things that seemed like a faraway dream, and now it's like a privilege to be able to work in this space. The Big Bathhouse, I want to say it was like one of the first books I started working on initially. So how I got started in the industry was also with like a author, like authoring my own and illustrating my own book. And so the Big Bathhouse was with Kyo was one of the first few books where I was just doing the illustration for. And it was just like a great fun project to work on. And so when I got the manuscript for Noodles on a Bicycle, it was like a no-brainer, automatic yes. And it was like such a fun project to illustrate. Like the research was just like very, very interesting, and it took me down so many rabbit holes. And it was also a project where I got to involve my mom in, because she studied in a university in Japan when she was younger. And so it was nice when it was a project not just for myself, but kind of encompassed a little bit more.
Yeah, and I'll ask you more about that in a little bit. Um, let's go to Meera. You've written a number of books, I think, if I'm correct. Talk to us just about entering the field, and how you ended up on this project kind of at this point in time.
Sure. So I grew up in India, and as a child, I did not have access to picture books. So I had never read a picture book in my life until I had immigrated to the US. And then I was working as an electrical engineer. Then I became a mom. So when my first when I had my first child, my daughter, we would go to the library. The first time I entered the children's section, then we brought back picture books and board books. We would bring back so many picture books, stacks and stacks of picture books. And yeah, so we enjoyed reading those books. We read about unicorns and fairies and dogs and cats and fairy tales and all of that. But after a certain point, something started to bother me. I realized that we weren't noticing children like my own in the books that we were reading. We did not have our stories. When I say our stories, I mean immigrant experiences and children growing up across cultures. So those experiences were not included in the stories that we were reading. And this started to bother me so much that I decided I wanted to tell our stories. I just felt compelled to tell our stories. And by then I had already fallen in love with picture books, such a powerful medium, the aesthetics, the themes, all of it. So I quit my job as an electrical engineer and decided I wanted to write picture books. It was a hard journey because I did not have a background in humanities or the creative arts. So it took me a few years to understand the craft, to learn about the industry, all of that. And then my debut came out in 2019. And with this particular book, The Spice Box, as an immigrant, when I use the Spice Box every day and I cook every day, just it's such a sensory experience because you are smelling the spices. I use my hands. I'm feeling all the spices, different textures. I'm tasting the food as I cook, and immediately I'm transported to India or to my family, to a favorite dish. The food that I grew up, with, and maybe my grandmother's favorite recipe, and all of that. So it takes me back home in a way, and most definitely connects my family to our roots. So it sort of tells us where we come from, why we eat the way we eat, what we eat. So it's so much about identity for my children and all second generation immigrants, regardless of where you are from. So that's sort of what led me to tell this story about how even something as simple as a box could connect us to our roots, celebrate our heritage, and allow our children to take pride in that.
Thank you. And Seina, you've this is your second book. I know you've got another one in the works, I think coming soon. But talk to us about getting into the field and this project.
Okay, wow. Um, I've always loved reading books and writing stories, and I think it's pretty obvious for anyone who's been to my home that we own, if you can say that, way too many books. I like to tell the kids in the classes that I read to that my garage is full of boxes of books. And so we have to park our cars in the driveway. So basically, I love books, and I always knew that I wanted to write. So when my children were born, I knew that I wanted to write stories that highlighted some piece of our heritage. I grew up in Nigeria, so I'm Nigerian American. And my last picture book was called Naming Ceremony. And it was about a girl who wanted to pick the perfect name for her baby sister's naming ceremony. And so that was very much steeped in my family's culture and traditions. And I knew that for my next book, I wanted to do something a little different. I grew up reading books on magic, fairies, elves, goblins, you name it, flying chairs, and I wanted to weave some of that magic into a book that one would consider just normal or, ordinary. So I just knew I wanted to write something a little bit different. And that's how I came up with the idea for the night market. So Nigerian night markets are basically our day markets that open late into the night. And that's to help serve the working class who are working full-time during the day and don't have time to go to the markets for regular things. And so they have to go to the markets at night. And so I wanted to weave in some sort of magic. As a child, growing up at night always felt so enchanting, and I wanted to capture that and distill that into a picture book. I'd always enjoyed visiting markets, and so bringing that magic into Nigerian night market was a lot of fun to write. And yes, I have another book coming out, and that's called Space for Everyone, and that'll be out next spring.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up magic. I got a sense of magic kind of from all of these books. Maybe a little more explicitly with yours, but that's kind of a theme we might come back to as we go on. But let's dig into kind of the meat of the theme here, which is the Read Around the World theme. I want to talk about culture and community, and I'll try to kind of keep my questions not too long, because I have so much on my mind about it. But I'll start with Gracey on this one. But for each of you, I want to talk about the kind of device, I guess, at the root of each of your stories, like the literary device. And for Gracey, if, of course, it's the soba delivery man. But thinking about culture and your audience, your young audience in mind, I'm curious, what about that culture was important to kind of portray on the page? And like, what do you hope? And this also is an audience question, by the way, it just happened to line up. Um, but what do you hope that readers take away from the book as far as that culture goes, kids or adults even?
Yeah, I would say actually when making this book, I noticed this when I meet other people that there are always things that feel very, very familiar to you that can feel so foreign to other people. And like this goes for anything, but for this book, because it was such a vibrant world, I kind of wanted to make this kind of spectacle of delivery drivers seem normal and accessible, but at the same time, like a world that's still interesting and new. Um, and so a lot of the scenery is a lot of the cityscapes. And so filling it with like small details and Easter eggs was one of the ways that I wanted to do that. So yeah, I'm just repeating myself now, but it's like making the foreign seem familiar.
Yeah. Well, and your book is unique here in the sense that you're depicting it as I believe like is it 1950s Tokyo, like a very specific
Yeah, it was like a
environment.
miss. I got like strangely into like the vehicles where I was like, no, I can't put this vehicle. It's from the 60s and I set this in the 50s. And then I was like, what? Like I'll just put the vehicle in, it's fine.
Yeah.
But it's yeah, like a conglomeration of like 50s and 60s Tokyo.
Yeah. Which was really cool, something I had not certainly seen. Let me go to Hazar then. Again, I want to talk about the specific literary device. So for you, the olive tree, um, and it's this beautiful symbol, and of course, it has this metaphoric power, but it's also a very real, literal part of the land and the culture. Maybe you can talk about kind of the aha moment of realizing you wanted to build your story around that element and what you wanted to kind of what you wanted readers to get out of that.
Yeah. So olive trees are so important. They're so filled with the symbolism. And one of the things that I wanted people to get from Palestinian culture was, how much, people in Palestine are so connected and they care for each other, and especially in tough times. And we always help each other out. And I feel like that's what makes us stronger. And through the olive trees, I wanted to show kids how connected it brings us and how much we rely on each other and the olive trees, um, and how much it matters. And we have to, stay strong and stand together. And um, I hope people take that away from the Palestinian culture, because we're just like the olive trees. So I feel like they make the connection.
And you have your main character Salam is plants a tree at the beginning. Um, was there any kind of specific experience that led to because at at the front end when you're reading the book, it's a very kind of simple, lovely story of a girl, her grandpa, her Sido planting a tree together before things start to happen and kind of tragedy comes into it. Um, were you thinking about the children kind of reading it in that way at first and like getting them into the story that way?
Yeah, absolutely. And I try to incorporate stuff from my own personal place because we go back to Gaza very often, and my dad has a huge landscape of just olive trees. So I try to incorporate my own, what I see my dad go through and put those characteristics in Sido. So everything I see on a day to day, I always wanted to incorporate it and really hope that people see how, people in Gaza and anybody in that matter that is going through, war can relate to this and see the culture in those like little bits of the olive trees. And I feel like it's a olive tree is a very universal tree that people see a lot of symbolism in. So yeah.
Yeah. It's obviously a very specific place on the page, but I noticed that you left it open as far as like you didn't put labels in the text, so it does give it that universality that can apply to kids everywhere, which is really cool. Meera, let's go to you. You already sort of started speaking about this, of course, but the spice box um, as an object that you can explore culture through and history and multi-generations. What about it was perfect for bringing kid readers into like a bigger cultural experience?
So I think food is one of the most accessible ways or resources for us to share about culture, or for anyone to experience any culture outside of their own, right? Like food brings people together, food bridges cultures, all of that. But if you were to look at the iceberg metaphor for culture, there are all these very tangible, visible things at the top of the iceberg that's floating. So you have like food and music and art and clothing that are more tangible to experience culture. But what's invisible, what's underneath the water, at the bottom of the iceberg, are all these nuances in the culture, right? Belief systems, family values, stereotypes, and such things. So for me, the spice box and its journey, you rightly said it, it's a vehicle, right? It's a vehicle to sort of peel these layers of South Asian cultures. So the story actually addresses themes of immigration. The grandmother in the story is pushing boundaries at a time when women weren't allowed to work. So why weren't women allowed to work? It challenges gender role stereotypes. So what about it is a gender role stereotype in Indian culture or Indian communities? So it addresses all these themes. The other thing is that when I include a recipe of a curry, the potato curry in the book, and there is the term curry powder in the West. You go to a store and you buy curry powder, but actually there is no curry powder in India. So there's the masala, which is a concoction of spices. There are powders, different powders that we use to make a curry, but there's no one curry powder. It's almost like the British, when they left India, they just coined the term curry powder in a very simplistic way. And so for me, having the spice box and honoring the different spices, giving it its name and color and flavor, and including a recipe with using each different spice, is almost decolonizing and reclaiming our food. So it's like decolonizing our story, decolonizing our minds for ourselves and for audiences. So it's all about going into the nuances of the culture rather than just using food in a very simplistic way to experience a culture.
I love that. That's great. And I also love in the same way I was saying to Hazar, like the surface level story of just a kid who wants to cook and engage in those kind of elements of their culture, is such a kind of classic universal way to, like, I was a kid in my mom's kitchen immediately, picking up the book, which is wonderful.
Right.
Seina, this is a different kind of book, and same with Gracey's, actually, in the sense that it's not necessarily narrative conflict that's driving it, but it's this sense of wonder, and it's this presentation of this kind of cultural place, this thing. Um, and I don't know, I'm dying to just hear more about the markets in general. Because I believe you're basing some of it on experience, but you're also elevating it into this maybe more magical. I don't know. In my mind, as somebody who doesn't know, it could have been totally real, or it could have been elevated into a more magical thing.
Well, I've never seen a jellyfish glowing in the dark and still in the market, but I wouldn't be surprised to see
Yeah.
one someday. But Nigerian markets are really an experience in their own right. From the bustling yellow buses, the suyas being wrapped and sold in newspapers, colorful artworks for sale, rows and rows of stalls full of fabrics, that the local custom for very significant events is that people would sew matching clothes with their families, and this is called anko. So usually you would sew those for weddings and very significant life events. And when you go to Nigerian market, both day and night, it's not uncommon to see these stalls full of just really beautiful fabrics and, tailors another row over, just right there, ready to take your measurements and sew these beautiful outfits for you and your family. And it's so easy to get used to the hustle and the bustle of it all and lose that excitement of what it is to visit a market. But you still see that joy with children. And I really wanted readers to be able to see like wonder in the mundane. So I think about the night market and when I was writing this and how much I really wanted to capture that excitement of what it could be like to visit something for the first time. And for those of you who read this story, you can see that it's written in second person because I kind of wanted to be able to pull the reader in and have them imagine what it'd be like to run through this market, through the stalls and experience things. And what a lot of people might not know is that the Nigerian market's really a backbone of our society. A lot of people who run these market stalls are women, and this is how they feed their families. And a lot of them might be farmers or just really small business owners, and they sell these foods. And I remember as a child, when I would go to the market with my family, my mom would always have a particular seller that she buys from. So she'll first try to go to that person, and if they're not there, buy from somebody else. So it's really just community and supporting one another. And I wanted to capture that. And I think Brianna did a great job doing so.
Such a great job. I'll bring that up and that'll be the next round. But you also answered my next question, which was kind of viewing this market through a community lens, and you answered it beautifully. Let me go back to Meera, shifting more into the community/family lens. You made some interesting choices, I thought, with regard to how you presented the family. You can speak generally about it. I found myself fascinated by the choice of having a father and a son, specifically, and of course the grandmother. But it seemed like an intentional sort of statement, maybe as far as gender goes. Could you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, you nailed it. Yeah, definitely. Like I mentioned earlier, I wanted to challenge the norms and expectations that are typically associated with gender roles in South Asian communities, and I'm sure applies to several communities and cultures around the world. So if you look at like a female, a woman, typically they stay at home and they are expected to cook and clean. And if you look at the culinary industry, right? Like all the chefs and head cooks are somehow there's a disparity there, and they are very male dominated. So it was very intentional for me to include a grandmother who wanted to become a chef, like by choice, wanted to go out there and work and become a chef in the city. So she leaves her village with a spice box and goes to the city on her own. And then there's the dad who is so involved in the kitchen and he's cooking. And there's this little boy who loves to cook. So outside in the community, the grandma being a woman, and then the dad at home without the mom in any scene, in any picture, is in control of the kitchen and the spices and cleaning up and fixing and all of that with his little boy. So that was very intentional, and I wanted to normalize these switched gender roles for my own community and for other communities outside of my own.
I love it. Let's go to Gracey. Again, I'm talking more about the community and the family aspects. You mentioned, and I mean, it's supposed to be somewhat of a twist, I suppose. As you're reading the book, it begins a little more zoomed out, I guess, and it's sort of this slice of culture and place and time, revolving around the delivery man. But then there's a revelation at some point that it's really kind of a family story underneath it all. I'm curious, as an illustrator, um, were you surprised by that shift? Did it change kind of the way you approached the first part, knowing that it was a family story underneath it all? Like, or did it, like, what considerations did it affect, I guess?
Uh, it's it was actually really funny because I don't know what it is if me and Kira are just constantly like intertwined, but a lot of the stories that she writes have a lot of overlap and similarity with my own family. So initially in the book, the manuscript, it had 5 children at the beginning, which was the exact number of siblings my mother had growing up. And my father also worked in the food industry as well. And so like there was just a lot of coincidences, but I do think like it was nice to kind of approach the story initially in the beginning, in the early scenes, where there's a bit of distance and you're seeing this figure and they almost seem a bit like a hero in a story, and then near the end of the story the hero is your father, which is also like very true in some ways. And so it's like the hero is coming home and has brought home the treasure, the bowls of noodle for the family. um, and so nothing really changed in the way I approached it, but it there was like more a different layer of special meaning to the story to me. So in that sense it was a little bit of a personal story as well.
Yeah, I love that about it. I feel like my understanding is you travel a good bit, and you see communities throughout the world. I'm just fascinated by the idea of, especially as an illustrator, having to capture a community visually, and just like, I mean, how many you did so much work on wide city streets with just crowds of people, busy people, like doing all kinds of things. Um, I suppose we'll talk about this a bit more with when we get into illustrations, but I'm just curious, like tonally, like how do you present a culture um writ large on the page? That's a hard question to answer, I know, but I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Like a lot of the research is just like me submersing myself as many Google images as possible. And so that the things that feel unknown to me start to feel like familiar. And so that you can start to form this visual language that makes sense. Um, I'm normally based in New York, and I had been to Tokyo a few times as a like young toddler to like young teenager because my mother would go back to visit her early adulthood friends then. And she's always trying to convince me to move out of New York and go live somewhere, a city of culture like Tokyo. And she sees New York as just this like rat infested dump. I love New York, but I see why she wants me to move so much. And so while working on this book, she was just like, oh, you know, if you live there, this would be so much easier. So yeah, there is mostly it's just like a lot of image research and familiarizing yourself as much with the subject. So yeah,
Yeah.
thank God for Google.
Right. Well, let's keep moving in that illustration direction, and I'll go to Hazar. Um, we've been speaking, I think, mostly as a writer, but I'm curious about your choices as an illustrator as well. Um, I mean, you've talked about community, and I thought it was such a good device, I guess, again, for lack of a better word, just the way you have the story move through the community visually, and you get to see all the pieces of it. And then, of course, at the end, it becomes sort of the core part of the story is community coming together. But can you talk about, if you have anything more to say? You've already spoken about community in general, but as a visual, putting all those people on the page together, how did you approach that?
The approach was kind of simple, because I just, look at my own community and just place them on there. I'm always, seeing, like, I'm like, where are you from? Where are you from? Palestine. I'm like, oh, I found a Palestinian baker. I found, even here, like, it's very easy to, find, but like it's very easier when I go back and we just know everybody. These people are who we grew up with. It's the same neighborhood. We go to the same place. So my dad just knows everybody. So I'm like, if he knows them, I have to know them. So it's just, I just put my whole, neighborhood on this page. And I, it's the same journey. and they're always, they're our safety net. They're the people that we grew up with. We know their father's father. So it's I have to put them on the page and represent how these people are not just somebody that lives next door. It's our community is our family. They're connected, and they're always there for us. So I had to like put them in the illustrations, just
Yeah.
put their right next to the people. They look exactly the same.
I don't know. I got such a sense of individuality. Like your illustrations aren't like the most detailed necessarily, but um they're really in focus on the page compared to the background, and I got a real sense of individuality from them that I loved. Here's a random sort of tangential question about the visuals. I think that my olive tree is printed on like olive toned paper. Is that, can you confirm that? And did you have anything to do with that?
I don't think it's olive. It's but it is tree.
Like,
Like it's
hmm.
like a certain, I don't know the specifics of it, but yeah, it's recycled. I can't give you the specifics.
Okay. So, but it's somebody in the process made a great choice, I think. It gives like an earthiness to the land, to me it reflected that sort of olive hint anyway. I just wanted to get that in
Yeah,
there.
I did that with the colors and everything. So they added more with the type of paper. It kind of went with the colors that I went with in the illustration.
Yeah,
So thank you for that.
yeah, it's an awesome detail. Let's see, Seina. Um, you brought up what is it, Brianna Mukadiri Uchendu?
Yes.
Um, just amazing work, right? Like,
Beautiful.
I mean, since you're not an illustrator, I guess give us the perspective of an author, and Meera, we'll do this with you as well, but
Mhm.
seeing those for the first time, because you sent off your
Okay.
manuscript. I assume you didn't speak to the illustrator and you received this work.
Right. Okay. So I have to tell you this. When I first received the sketches, before the color was added and everything was finalized, I just remember like poring over all the details in her drawings. So I'll back up for a minute about the night market and what I was hoping to portray here. I like to think of markets as a place where like traditions are preserved and passed down through generations. And it's really common in Nigerian markets for a child to, for example, go to a stall to get their hair braided and plaited. And you can buy such a huge range of goods, like really traditional goods, as well as, craft work, foods, local medicines. You can go to the markets and say, hey, we're the medicinal people. And someone can say something like, I don't feel well. And they'll have a collection of leaves and herbs pulled together and say this is how you can make brew something that you can drink to feel better. I don't know. It's just a place where you can find almost anything. And it really brings people together from different cultures and ethnic backgrounds together. And our markets are just full of rich, vibrant life. And I really wanted that to be highlighted in the book. So when I first saw Brianna's really stunning illustrations, I was blown away. Like this market takes place entirely at night, and I wasn't sure how this was going to be reflected on the page. And this book is full of such rich purples and oranges and really beautiful drawings. I remember like peering through and wishing I could see what was on the stalls on the far end of the page. I was just so blown away. I think she did an amazing job capturing the feel of an open market, and she wove in so many beautiful touches, and I loved everything about it. So I felt really lucky that she worked on this book. So beautiful.
Yeah, it's hard for me to imagine it without the illustrations, which is what you would hope for, I suppose. Did it change the way you saw anything in your own text? Like, was it more than you expected, or was it just kind of that perfect
I thought it
realism?
was the perfect medley. I always try to leave room for the illustrations in my work. So sometimes even when I put my manuscripts together, I'll put some illustration notes to kind of help drive the narrative. And I just think on her own, Brianna did a really great job, and the art directors and everybody who worked on this project. And um, he didn't have any complaints or any changes. Just really liked it a lot.
Yeah, that's the correct answer. But it's beautiful work. Meera, you as well. Um, Again, like such an incredible, rich, colorful, I mean, you feel the like explosion of the, and what's more beautiful than spices too, like as far as color goes, right? Like tell us about seeing those for the first time.
Right. First of all, it's very easy to please me because I can draw to save my life and I trust the publishers so much. And they're always spot on. Like with Sandhya, she grew up in the same city that I did in India and the same community. So some things were just like magical for me. So when I first saw the art, they were rough sketches, and there was this little boy and this dad and the kitchen. So to share a little bit about the backstory, one of my inspirations was just my husband and my son cooking in the kitchen. So I would have all these flashes of these images of both of them just like talking, helping each other in the kitchen. And that was just like a repeating visual when I was writing the story. And then when I received the rough sketches to see this little boy who looked exactly like my son when he was 8, and my husband, like this dad who wore glasses just the way my husband does. And she had never met my family, right? So it was just so like goosebumpy because it was like this image in my head had just like come out on the spread. And even the details in the kitchen, like if you walked into any like an Indian American household or an Indian immigrant's kitchen, you would see like the brand of the blender, the kind of mortar pestle, like they were just like exactly like the ones that I had in my kitchen. And Sandhya had never been to my kitchen. So it was just so magical for me to like have this visual or literally my kitchen and my family sort of jump onto the pages of the book. And then when the colors were added and the entire book came together, like literally like my husband's favorite color t-shirt, like, and my mother-in-law, the grandmother is exactly like my mother-in-law, in a green sari. She's always in the green. I'm like, how did she even know this? Like, this is just such a specific detail, like very distinct to my family. Like, so it was just sort of one of those magical things where I just have this book that sort of like has my kitchen and my family members, but it's also in a way that's why people are able to connect to it instantly. Like that looks like my grandmother, and this is like my son when he's baking and things like that. So it couldn't have been any better, and I couldn't be any happier with how it turned out.
Yeah, yeah, it's really came out beautifully. Gracie, I want to ask you one more thing about illustrations. You mentioned doing research. There's the photos on the end papers of the actual delivery man. First of all, if I hadn't seen the photo, I don't know that I would believe that it was real because it's just kind of mind-boggling. Just these huge towers of stacked bowls and trays that these guys would ride around with. Was that your I don't know if illustrators have say over kind of end paper photography, but um I'm curious how was it the same? Were you referencing photos for your depictions of them as well?
So many photos. Yeah. And they were the first thing that I looked up. And I actually showed the photo to my parents and I sent them. And immediately my parents were like, Photoshop. And I was like, no, it's real.
Yeah.
But the photos on the end papers, that was actually a great idea from the editor and art director. They both they emailed me back and said, how would you feel about this? And I was like, that's a great idea. Yeah.
Yeah, it sells it. We mentioned magic earlier, and I mean, to me, I encourage everybody to Google it, I guess, or well, buy the book first. But to see these guys, yeah, and like in your illustrations, you have them kind of. I was very anxious reading it, to be honest, because I was waiting for the big spill to happen, but it never happened. They're professionals. But it just seems like a really cool project, from that standpoint. We have a little bit of time left. I want to ask, since each of these books are out in the world, um, about your audiences, your readers. I don't know, Gracie, have you do you tour for a book that you're illustrating? Did you get to meet up with Kyo or anything like that and see how readers are reacting?
we've worked on 2 books together and we've never met in person. We've never even been on the same like Zoom or like an online panel before. So hopefully in the future. But yeah, no, the book came out a month ago almost to this day, but I haven't been on any tours. So
Okay.
no, I haven't.
Okay. Hazar, what about you? It's been maybe a week. Have you gotten to sit down with any young readers or adults and get like a face-to-face reaction?
I haven't had the face-to-face yet, but once it was released, it was like it's like a short time. But I'm quite surprised with the amount of, Palestinians that come through like online and they talk about like their experience reading this book, saying that they're crying and they finally get to see this type of representation, especially, during the time and the war with Gaza. They're like, we need this. We need this type of book happening right now and, bring awareness to everything that's happening. So it's incredibly moving to me to like see these families, facing such challenges with their families back in Palestine with like an unsafe place, and they're just telling me their stories and how they're like crying, and I'm like, I'm crying too. Because I love hearing how this helps them, and hopefully in the younger generation they get to read this book and keep the story going. So very excited about that.
Yeah, as soon as it came into our office, we were all kind of blown away by how much we needed that kind of a book, and we immediately passed it around, and we're all telling everybody about it. So, yeah, that's how it goes. Seina, what about you? Have you gotten to do any kind of events or anything like that?
Yes, actually. So my book has been out for 2 weeks now, and the weekend that this book came out on a Tuesday, and that weekend I had 2 launch events at local bookstores. I live in California, here in the Bay Area, and I partner with 2 local indie bookstores to have my book launch events. And it was just so fun to get all the kids in there and to read the night market. And because I wanted to somehow portray um this feeling of wonder and excitement, I had a magician. I don't know how I thought about that, but I did. I had a magician for both events, and the kids had so much fun. And at the end, when we're doing questions, everyone wanted to talk about the markets they'd been to before and what their favorite stall was. And actually, one of the activities that we had during my events was to have kids design their own stall. So it was really exciting and interesting to see what they were putting in their stalls, to hear why they picked what they picked. And it's been a lot of fun. I've only done one school reading so far. That was last week. And I'm hoping to get more on the calendar. So it's been great meeting young readers everywhere. It's always so much fun to read to them.
Yeah, that sounds like a great way to involve them and engage them. Meera, what about you?
Yeah, my book has been around for a few months now. Summer, I couldn't do as many events, but I've been on tours. And couple of things. One is I get DMs periodically on social media where someone is pinging me and saying that this is exactly like my mother-in-law's spice box, or this is exactly like the one that I chose to carry when I moved here to America, or things like that, which are very powerful for me. And then in terms of events, I had the opportunity to present at the LA Times Book Festival, and it was a pretty big audience. And after that, at the book signing, there was this boy and his dad who walked up to me, got a copy of the book. And I remember this distinctly because the boy is very quiet and his dad was doing the speaking, and he said he has never talked about being in the kitchen, baking, cooking, none of it. And now he wants to go to the grocery store right from here. Like we're headed to the grocery store, and then he knows what he wants to cook, but he hasn't shared that with me. So that was going to be his very first time, just like Rishi in the book, cooking, and hopefully with his dad. So that was a very sweet thing. And then in terms of activity, I usually have the guess the spice game at my story times and visits, and just to see kids excited to smell and like feel and like all of that touch, sometimes even taste. So that's been fun to see kids excited about the spices and cooking and all of that.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I love that. Okay, just a couple minutes left. So to close, this is a question that I shamelessly steal from authors Chris Barton and Jennifer Ziegler, I believe. They have a web series of short interviews called This One is Dedicated To, where they just ask an author to read their dedication and just say a few words about it. And sometimes it leads to kind of interesting information about the author, about the book. You never kind of know where it's going to go. But I was hoping to ask each of you to do that if you don't mind. So maybe we can start with Meera. If you could read it and just give us whatever you've got on it.
Sure. So I dedicated this book to my husband, who is very passionate about cooking, although I cook a lot now, but he's the more methodical one, the one who's curious about cooking and all of that. So my dedication reads to my husband, who always cooks up a storm for me. And he does, truly he does. And I can see my aunts and uncles back in India picking up their jaws, like, how could he cook for the woman? But that's the point of the dedication. So thank you.
Thank you. Gracie, what about you?
So I don't actually have I'm not home right now, but I dedicated the book to my mother and one of our family friends who actually did not know how to say her name because I only referred to her as like auntie as a child. And I was like, oh, I actually have no idea what her name is. But she was a Japanese family friend. And so she was always like one of the aunties who carpooled us. And there was also a period when I was a teenager where I was just having like a lot of muscle issues, and she worked as a masseuse, and so she would come over and do massages, and she would refuse to take monies. So it was just like such a kind thing for her to do. But during the process of making the book, I was referring and asking my mom to ask her, be like, "Oh, does Auntie know? Like, what does this mean? Or does this seem right?" And so there was a lot of back and forth and like a bit of a telephone game for the making of this book. And so, yeah, they just became part of it.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
Stana, you want to go next?
Yes. So my dedication reads for Tom, who's the most adventurous person I know, and for Anna, who enjoyed the story as soon as I shared it with her. And Tom is my husband, and he's not Nigerian. And I remember very vividly his first visit to Nigeria with me. I had so much fun taking him to some of the local markets, and it was such a great time. And also, Anna is my twin sister, and we grew up going to the markets together with our family. And it was really just so affirming to see how much she enjoyed this book. And yeah, so the night market is for both of them.
Perfect. And Hazar, do you mind closing us out?
Yes. So my dedication is dedicated to the children of Gaza whose strength inspires us to keep on growing back. And I just had to give my first book to the children of Gaza specifically, because I don't know how they keep on going, and they hopefully grow up to be this strength of the Palestinian people. They resemble us, so I just had to give it to them.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for the book. Thank you all for your books. This was such a great group and such a great, not just individually, but great to kind of read all four of these together for me. So I hope everybody will check them all out. Again, they're all on shelves. And that's our time. So I thank you again for being here, and I will wave and do some closing remarks here in just a moment. All right. And as I say farewell, you're also welcome to turn off your cameras if you like. But thank you again.
Yeah.
All right. So tomorrow, all attendees will receive an email containing links to today's slide presentation, title list, certificate of completion, and video recording. For more about Booklist webinars, be sure to visit booklistonline.com/webinars, where you can view archives of past webinars and register for upcoming ones like those you see here. Attention all library workers, educators, booksellers, and students. We have a special subscription offer exclusive to webinar attendees. Subscribe to Booklist now and stay on top of the latest books, glean reader's advisory guidance, and get collection development advice through print and digital editions of Booklist and access to Booklist Online. Plus, our Booklist subscription now comes with free digital and shareable copies of our new product for patrons, Booklist Reader. Scan the QR code or visit our website for more details. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. One more big thank you to our panelists and to our sponsor, Random House Children's Books. This concludes today's webinar, and we will see you next time.